So now we're going to develop the foundation next, leading into the first course, which is your surface level narrative or your surface level character arc. Now this goes back to the beginning of the workshop where I talked about making your character more than a list of attributes. We're going to start with just some attributes about Tanielle. So at the surface level, this foundation, some basic attributes about Tanielle and about the story. It stars a young female lead, it stars a person of color, predominantly female cast. It's a mixture of genres and experiences to ensure a fun and compelling narrative for everyone. Great for fans of fantasy and high fantasy and urban fantasy and speculative fiction. Relatable on a variety of levels. It dives into topics of motherhood and complex family dynamics, worth and worthlessness, finding yourself, deals with homelessness and isolation, will appeal to fans of fantasy, adventure, action, and character-driven narratives. It's a coming-of-age story, it's the hero's journey, it's setting levels and expectations and not betraying the trust and relationships established with your audience. This part is key. As a narrative or as a franchise or as a experience continues to grow, you will have myriad voices pushing you in myriad directions as to how you ought to develop your narrative, how you ought to develop your characters, how you ought to change things and alter things to appeal to various target markets and audiences, and you have to make the difficult decision of which voices do you heed by degrees and where do you stay true to your narrative experience. So bear that in mind as you go through your creative process. So we're going to take a few minutes here, and I want you guys to take your protagonist. Take whomever your story focuses on the most, and I want you to just come up with some very surface level attributes about this character. All right, fair play. So we've had our tease, we've had our appetizer, we've laid down our foundation, and this is what I call surface level narrative or surface level character development, right? These are a list of attributes, these are a list of things that we know about our character, and our character is now beginning to take shape, right? They're beginning to take on dimension. So now we're going to take these attributes and we're going to build upon them even further. And that takes us to our second course, where we're going to add more depth to our protagonist. So a good way to do this is to go back to your list of attributes and to select key points that you're then going to expand upon. And I'll tell you, one of the fun and frustrating things about being a writer is you will create so much information about your character and your world, and you'll do so much research that no one but you will ever see, but everybody will feel. I have a novel that I'll be releasing Q2 next year, and it's got a protagonist who she was in the wrong place at the wrong time in her teens, and she ended up going to jail on severe charges for something she didn't do, but she was involved in, and as a result, she wasn't around for her younger sister, who went through quite a lot. And her dream is she's going to get out of prison and she's going to reconnect with her little sister, and she's going to make good on life, and she's not going to screw up this time, and she's going to be everything she wasn't for her before. And I have never been a woman in prison before. Shocking, I know. So I had to do a lot of research, but not just on the experience of being a woman in prison. Everything led to another thread, right? I started reading about prisoner allowances, monetary allowances, and I was like, what do you use money for in jail? So then I had to research about that. Turns out you have to buy everything: your clothes, your toiletries, your medicine, your hygiene products, the whole 9 yards. Most prisons, you only get paid 50 cents to $1.50 a day if you're lucky. I did all this research, and then I had this crazy spreadsheet where I had to figure out over the course of X amount of years, how much would she be making? Would she ever get a raise? What could she buy with that? Is she spending money home? I did 2 weeks of research for like one chapter of the book, but it made it more relatable and more real and more compelling. And it added authenticity and depth. So let's go back and let's look at adding more depth to that character. She's a young black female, she's homeless and then she's adopted. She endures traumas. She grows up in a blended household, she's bullied at school. Her family moves around a lot, making it difficult to establish lasting bonds and relationships, especially when the catalyst of the move tends to be uncanny circumstances. She struggles to navigate the complexities of the perception, stigmas, and paradigms of modernity, such as school life, being raised by 2 women, and more. She has night terrors, confusing dreams of being another girl. She sees and hears things that others can't. She likes to read, she plays viola and violin. She experiences a call to action. She must receive a crash course in the supernatural and prepare for battle. She inherits a world of chaos with dire dangers and desperate struggles ahead of her. She must realize who she can be to embrace who she is. So we've taken what we built upon before and we've added depth to each one of those aspects of it. And we're combining those two things together to add depth and dimension to our character. So, Mike, you kind of already did that. You're ahead of the curve. But let's take a little bit of time, and I want you guys to go back over what you've written so far, and I want you to think about what are some key points that you want to hone in on. Now, the difference between this layer and the layer that we were previously at is we're taking the list of attributes that we had, and we're honing in on key parts that build upon those attributes. She has things she likes, but what does she like? And we're going to build on why does she like them and what does that say about her as a person. She has these night terrors, right? But how do they make her feel? How do they inform her experience? And in turn, how do they lead into other additional threads? So we're going to take that list that we had before, and I want you guys to find some key points that are interesting to you that are going to be narrative threads that we're going to tease out and we're going to experience and we're going to continue to build upon over the course of our protagonist's narrative arc. So now that we've added more depth to the protagonist, we're going to, surprise, surprise, build on that even further. So this is where we get to our main course. We've had our teaser, we've had our appetizer, we've laid down our foundation, we've set up the framework on our foundation, and now it's time to build on that framework to make our character more than memorable, but also compelling. So let's talk about homelessness and how that informs Tanielle's life and her experiences. She's a 7-year-old girl alone on the streets. Think about that. 7 years old, this little girl all by herself, nobody to look out for her, always looking over her shoulder. She's wondering, why does no one love me? Why does no one want me? Why is no one looking for me? She's cold, she's hungry, she's always looking over her shoulder. She's dirty, she's lonely, she's sleeping under benches and digging for food in trash cans. She's invisible, she's untrusted, she's mistreated. There's false perceptions of who she is and how she got there. She's desperate, she's isolated, she's doing what she must to survive. She spends years watching happy families go by. No happy birthdays, no Merry Christmas, no Happy New Year. She's got to wonder, how long will my life be like this? So you see how we took an attribute and we built upon it. We added depth to it. We added emotional impact and nuance to it. We can look at how adoption impacts her life. She's a young black female adopted by a white woman with a black cousin. She has to learn how to trust and how to be vulnerable. Brittany, her adoptive mother, and Tanielle have to learn together how to care for her hair, her skin. Tanielle has to work through the struggle of finding and defining her own ethnic and cultural identity while being raised in a blended household. She has to deal with the constant tug-of-war of joy and elation at finally having a place to belong, in contrast with the unanticipated mistreatment she receives from her peers, such as being called Tanny Two Moms by the bullies at school. She has to confront the fear, conscious and subconscious, of what if I'm not enough? What if I do something wrong and she doesn't want me anymore? What if I do something wrong and she doesn't love me anymore? What if, when I wake up, this was all a dream and I'm all alone again? So now we've gone beyond a thing that has happened to her, and we have taken the time to dive into how that impacts her and how it makes her feel and how it in turn causes her to operate in her day-to-day life. So we've built upon and added depth to that particular experience. How being bullied impacts her experience. Growing up as she has zero tolerance for bullies. Schools often punish the victim along with the bully. Schools often punish the victim instead of the bully. She's had to fight for so long for her happiness, and she already struggles with her self-worth. Old habits die hard. She's going to defend herself however she feels she must, so that may compel her to go a little overboard when she sees a threat coming her way. But as she's getting in trouble for just trying to take care of herself, she's got to wonder, is my existence a burden? Would my mom be better off without me? Why is this happening to me? I've not done anything to these people. How dare you attack my beloved family? You don't know what I've been through. Maybe I should just disappear. So again, we've taken a thing that has happened, and we have added emotional depth to how this thing impacted this character and in turn, how it will impact how this character operates in the world around her, and how it informs her experiences with the narrative as it unfolds. How her dreams and nightmares will shape her waking life. What is the tall man and what does he mean to me? This flaming knight that I see in my nightmares stalking me. Is this just a manifestation of my traumas, or is there more going on here? Who's the little girl that I dream that I am? Who's in this place that I've never seen before? What's the significance of the meadows that I'm wandering through in my dreams? Who is this Norael? Who's this Nora girl that I hear myself being called by in my dreams? Why do the shadows whisper to me? Why do I see things that aren't there? Why does mom get upset when I share these things? Am I broken? Am I damaged? Am I flawed? Will I ever be whole again? All these things are racing through our character's mind, and all these things are part of the human experience that doubtless each of us has struggled with by degrees at some point or other. Do I belong? Am I enough? Am I whole? Will I ever be whole? What is being whole? By the way, being normal is overrated. Be weird. How do her interests inform who she is? We know she likes to read, but what does she like to read, and what does it say about her as a person? Well, we briefly touch on in the first novel that her favorite book is Anna Karenina. Anybody have you guys read or seen or heard of Anna Karenina? So I would argue that Anna Karenina is one of the most misunderstood stories that's out there. If you've read the book, if you've seen the movies, and you have a relationship with the narrative, and you've had a conversation with somebody who hasn't, most people who are not familiar with the story, they associate Anna Karenina as, oh yeah, that's that book about that chick that sleeps around a lot, right? And the story is so much more than that. I'll leave it to you guys to read through and experience it for yourselves, should you be so inclined. But why is Anna Karenina her favorite book? What about the book appeals to her, and why is she drawn to it? Well, we know that she has a strong sense of justice. This also informs us that she's drawn to complex characters, that it's interesting for her to view her faith as it is observed and recorded through the lens of another nation's culture, and the myriad experiences that informed the author Leo Tolstoy's human condition. She likes a good redemption story. She's interested in often misunderstood narratives, and is perhaps drawn to protagonists that struggle with self-worth, fitting into diametrically opposed societies, and discovering and holding on to their identities and ideologies in a less than ideal world. Now, when you read this book, it's not like we've got chapters upon chapters upon chapters where she's like, and then chapter 2 of Anna Karenina. Like, it's literally referenced very quickly. It's her favorite book. She's reading it by the window. She has a vision. She blacks out. She spills her tea. She ruins her book. She messes up the rug in her clothes. She's got to go take a shower. She's like, man, I sure hope that my book's okay. Never comes up again. But that book and its existence is significant, right? Who's familiar with the term a Chekhov gun in a narrative? So for anybody who's not familiar with it, it came from an author, Chekhov, who the phrasing that goes with it is, if you call attention to a gun hanging over a mantelpiece in Act 1 of your story, by God, you'd better fire that gun by Act 3. And so the fact that we call things out has significance. And so your reader isn't going to have Tanielle wax poetic about Anna Karenina, but the fact that I took the time to call it out is going to make them curious. And you can see the parallels that begin to form here. I'm going to move a little bit quicker, a little bit short on time here, but I don't mind staying later to answer questions and the like. So how do her interests inform who she is? Well, she plays string instruments, specifically the viola and the violin. The viola is rarely at center stage. It's often relegated to the harmony. The violin is generally the star of the show. It often plays the melody. So this represents a sense of duality to Tanielle's character and provides a sense of the progression of her journey. All right, she's a skilled violist can play any melody a violinist can play, providing a sense of a girl who's not content to sit on the sidelines. Learning string instruments and honing that craft presents characteristics of discipline, grace, depth, hard work, and dedication. There is an implied sense of beauty and the capacity to invoke an endless array of emotion. There's a certain desire to support your tribe, the violist, to be in the spotlight, the violinist, a desire for family, the orchestra, and a place to belong, the theater, and to be admired and loved by many, the audience. So the simple call out that she plays these instruments comes with myriad implied connotations. Now, One thing that you will have to accept as an artist is you will have such symbology and intention and depth, and your audience may not necessarily pick up on everything you're hoping that it invokes. However, we also live in an unprecedented time of information exchange. And so what this will do is it will encourage discussion, it will encourage thought, it will encourage theorizing. And these conversations will happen. And this is a hard one, but be okay with people not understanding your story the way you want them to. Be okay with your art impacting people in their unique ways. Be okay with somebody getting something out of your work. They love you, they love what you do, that's enough. Let them have their own human experience. So how does this impact her journey? She's a girl who values family, friendship, honor, and integrity, but struggles with the traumas of her past. She begins building a better relationship with Peter Williams, her biggest bully. Peter, in turn, opens up and begins to share why he's the way he is. As a result, Peter and Tanielle become friends. Tanielle is mistrustful of the new transfer students who have their eye on her due to her background and experiences. When Torva and Tanault try to help her when the tall man attacks, revealing that they were sent to protect her and bring her home, she and Peter fight and flee. When the group tries to escape the tall man, Tanielle is derailed and lost in a frightening dimension, the Grand Library in Sombertown. This is what is called a continuing because thread and narrative. So when you watch movies, pick any movie, I want you to take a step back and I want you to watch the narrative flow. And I want you to ask yourself, is this a story that says, this happened because this happened, because this happened, and so this happened? Or is it a story that goes, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened? And the key difference is the and then story is disjointed. It's sensational, it's enjoyable, but nothing leads into anything else. Those are the movies that are written for that moment so that they can have the big, terrible threat coming and everything's dire and they're like, we need some help, who do we send? And the camera zooms in and the guy goes, everyone. That's your and story. Your because story is the one that is compelling. Your and story is the one that is memorable. Impact of her journey. Tanielle is a girl who fights for what she believes in. She defends herself and is fiercely protective of her friends and allies. We know these things because of the depth and dimension we have built on her character. So when she's lost in the Grand Library, she relies on her street smarts and survival tactics to explore carefully and to adapt her garments to better suit the situation. When she's attacked by a horrific spider demon, she knows when to escape, how to seize upon a weapon of opportunity, how to fight, and when it is time to cut and run. When she receives a telekinetic message from the Magus Baltazar, knowing the trouble she got in by not trusting Torva and Tanault, she listens and is able to get away freely. I have more examples, but again, we're short on time, and anyone so inclined, I can send you all the slides that were here today. So we're going to move on from the impact that continues those threads to the aperitif, which is adding dimension to your supporting cast. Now you have a main character of depth, but you don't want your supporting cast to just be window dressing, right? You want your supporting cast to have meaning as well. So we take those side characters and we build them out also. And you're not necessarily going to build them out as much as your protagonist. However, in your personal notes, maybe you do. In the movie, they're not going to get the same screen time as the hero, but in your personal notes, I encourage you to actually build out every single character in your story as much as you would your main character. You never know what you're going to do with that and with those characters. So as we add dimension, let's look back at Brittany and Cambiri, mom and cousin. They're actually the war maiden Dame Daphnel and the High Cleric of Era who served King Hezria and were charged with escorting Tanielle to Safe Bastion, where she was meant to be trained and protected until such time as she was ready to reclaim the throne. They're still cousins. So some struggles that these two women share is they struggle with their failures to help keep the kingdom from falling, to escort Tanielle safely to her original destination, to find Tanielle swiftly across the realms once they were separated from her. Upon finding her, they both struggle with what to do with the young princess when they discover her total amnesia, how to help her heal from her time spent alone in the streets, how to adapt to life on Earth, or the land of conflict as they call it, their inability to directly intervene more overtly when Tanielle is bullied and mistreated. Some unique struggles for Brittany or Dame Daphnel. Having left a life of warfare behind, it's difficult for her to accept that she may one day have to pick up her axe once more. She probably has some PTSD she's dealing with as well. She probably has to very carefully cultivate her responses to the experiences around her. Having adapted to raising Tanielle as her beloved daughter, she struggles with the knowledge that someday she has to send her darling child off into battle. Due to her inability to conceive, Brittany struggles even more so with knowing one day she must let Tanielle go, should they be able to save King Hezria and find Queen Letra. Due to her dedication to raising and caring for Tanielle above all else, Brittany has discarded the idea of romance, and she hides any loneliness she experiences. She doesn't go on dates, she doesn't make friends, she just goes to work and takes care of her daughter and looks out for demons. And she feels that she must forever atone for her failings. Cambria in turn has her myriad unique struggles as well, but let's look at Peter the bully. We learn that Peter is the way he is due to the circumstances of his broken home. His father is a Marine suffering from PTSD, emotionally distant, often cold in his demeanor and harsh in his dealings. His mother had affairs while his father was overseas and ultimately abandoned the family. His older brother lit out first chance he got and does not often maintain contact with Peter. As a result, Peter has a great deal of pain and trauma, as well as unkind feelings towards women that he takes out on Tanielle. In addition, his upbringing has taught him how to hit someone where it hurts with his actions and his deeds. But despite all this, Peter has a good heart and he wants to be better. Tanielle reaching out to him, because of all these things that we built about who she is as a person, and sharing her past traumas gives him the courage to be vulnerable and share his. Being a track star at his school, Peter's used to being in the spotlight and the lead, but he has to accept that the best way that he can support Tanielle is to be beside her, not in front of her. All of these things are depth and dimension that we add to our secondary characters as well. And they may not necessarily all make it into the finished product, especially in that at the screenplay we don't have as much real estate to work with. But when we keep those things in mind, we continue the thread of keeping depth with our side characters that builds and makes them memorable. So that even though Craig in the Goonies wasn't the main character, he still has a memorable and compelling scene. And the last thing that we want to tie it all together with is a memorable and impactful conclusion. So your narrative and its finale need to consider, in this case, I have to consider, will Tanielle be able to embrace her power and step into her role as Princess Noriel of Alara? Will she be able to gain the skills and talents necessary to defend herself against the forces that are coming to destroy her? Will she be ready to duel her father, the Tall Man, when the time comes? Will she be able to save him, or will King Hasvir remain lost to her forever? Will she be able to restore the Eternal Water Wheel before it erupts and destroys her world and ours? Now, it's important that I said that your narrative and its finale need to consider these things. It does not necessarily have to, hi kitty, it does not, ADD moment, it doesn't necessarily have to complete these things. Now, in the case of Nora, it's a series, right? 2 books released, 5 books done, 13 books planned. And so I'm not going to answer all of these questions. But even in the course of a one-shot, you're not necessarily going to answer every thread you pick up. But if you don't answer those threads, you have to ignore them with intentionality. You can't just have them be a plot hole that doesn't get addressed in any capacity. If you're going to leave some questions left unanswered, there has to be the tease, the taste of something more to come. Or you have to do it in a way that the point of the story is speculation, such as, oh gosh, DiCaprio, dimensions shifting, dives into dreams, Inception. For example, Inception throws out a question but it doesn't answer it. Nope throws out a question and it doesn't answer it. So these are examples of threads in a one-shot that you don't necessarily answer because you want your audience to consider them and be compelled by them. And that takes you into your sequel if you have a series, or it just leaves the question on the table if you want your audience to consider it as time goes on. But how do you get from here to here? You have to give your audience your Death Star moment. Regardless of whether you accomplish your primary goal or not, your audience needs something that compels them. And it doesn't always have to be a bang. If anyone's familiar with the Myth Nomers or Mything Inc. series by Robert Asprin, his stories never end on a bang. The bang happens at the 3/4 point, and then they end on a whisper. But he still gives you something satisfying as the narrative goes on. So Star Wars: A New Hope in a nutshell. Vader destroys planets, wiping out the rebels. Vader seeks Leia and captures her to learn about the rebel plans. He learns there is another, a surviving Jedi Master and a son of Anakin. Luke wants to escape his ho-hum life on Tatooine. He learns old Ben is actually a Jedi Master. He begins his journey to become a Jedi, and then he blows up the Death Star. Right? This is Star Wars in under 1 minute. But something to bear in mind with this is, let's look at Luke's grocery list here, right? His ultimate goal is to save the galaxy and to rebuild the Jedi Order. And to do so, he must defeat Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine. In order to defeat them, he has to become a Jedi Master and aid the rebels. But he can't accomplish his ultimate goal in the first movie, right? We don't deal with Palpatine. He doesn't even meet Palpatine in the first movie, right? He instead is able to deliver a crushing blow by blowing up the Death Star. And the ending scenes then set up the rest of his to-do list as the narrative goes on. And if the narrative does his job, Luke will fail or Luke will succeed. but he will hit each one of his narrative beats as the arc continues. But we have to have our Death Star moment. So when crafting your narrative, it's important to make certain that if it is a one-shot story, you provide a satisfying continuance and conclusion of the threads you laid out at the beginning of the narrative, and you make certain that if it is a series, you provide a satisfying conclusion to the moment, while teasing that there's more to be done. Bon appetit. And so, I realize we're over time, so do feel free to go if you have time commitments. I don't know when they're gonna come kick us out of this room, but until such time as, I will take any questions you have whatsoever.
So are you available for consultation?
I am, yes. Just shoot me an email at eugenetheauthor@gmail.com, and we'll work out a time and everything. Any other questions?
You had one bullet point on there where it talked about the character playing the viola and the violin, and the viola was her wanting to support the other characters, the violin was to be the lead, the family was the orchestra. Do you lay that out? Do you have that in mind before you write? Or do you write and this is what it becomes in the story?
Yeah, so my process is very chaotic. And so for me, I don't do a traditional outline for a story. When I'm conceiving a narrative or I'm conceiving a character, I will start with like a concept or an emotion or a thought or something I'd like to address. And from there, I'll have like, we call it a key visual. And it's the one-shot portraiture that invokes the tone and sense of emotion and depth and where your narrative is going and what it's meant to feel. So I'll have that key visual in my head. Like Nora in the Eternal Water Wheel, the original key visual in my head was black and white chalk drawing of a prince in a gilded cage and a princess coming to save him. And as you go through the series, that kind of becomes the relationship between Nora and Peter, Tanielle and Peter, as much as it is Tanielle and her father. And so I'll start building on those threads, and then I'm just constantly living in this character's head. And so I'm thinking, you know, what does she like to wear? What does she like to eat? What's her favorite cereal? You know, does she smack her lips when she chews her food? Does she tie her shoelaces? And as I'm building all of these things, and I start building out these attributes and these ideas in my head, from there, I'll start thinking to myself, okay, I have an idea of this character and who she is and what she does and what she's about. What are some ways that I can then invite my audience into my head and into Tanielle's head and share these ideas? And so from there, I'll think about, she plays string instruments. Okay, well, what does she play? You know, I used to play string instruments myself till I blew my shoulder in an accident. I played viola, I played violin, I played cello, I played contrabass. And so I have this inbuilt knowledge of what that experience is like and what draws people to various instruments and what the stereotypes are and how you break those stereotypes. And so from there, I'll build that out even further and go, now, I have so much real estate to tell this story. Let me put in something that has a symbolism for my audience. Let me lay some threads that will invoke what I'm hoping they get out of the symbolism, but let me also leave it open to interpretation so my audience can take their own experience out of it.
So does that come in a second draft, or are you laying some of that down in the first draft?
I lay all of that. So my process with drafts is weird. And this is actually one of the things that I wanted to say also is you'll hear all kinds of people telling you this is exactly the way that you have to do your screenplays, this is the way you have to do your, everything is a rule until it's not. I strongly encourage you all to look at I think we might be about to, we can take this outside if so. I'm gonna keep talking. I encourage you all to look at the screenplay for Gattaca. You'll hear people tell you all the time, you know, action lines have to be very short, like one sentence, get to the dialogue, nothing but dialogue. Gattaca opens with like 15 pages of paragraphs of action lines. Logan, that first fight scene, breaks away from that fight scene and has like 5 paragraphs on, this ain't your daddy's Wolverine, and it just breaks down everything about him. So I say all that to say, you'll be told do your first draft, do your second draft, do your third draft, and I strongly encourage you guys, don't worry about your first draft being perfect. For me, I don't do drafts in the traditional sense. As I'm writing my screenplays and my novels, I have my character outlines and what I'm working on, and I have my general plot idea in my head, but I'm also constantly rereading as I'm writing, and I'm sharing what I'm writing with my family and with some of my friends, and so I'm iterating as I go. So I kind of do my first, second, and third draft at the same time. And that's just my process, but everybody will have their own process. All right, any other questions? Yes.
Have you tried storyboard, using a storyboard?
I have desperately tried for, how old am I, 36? I seriously up about writing when I was 14, so I have tried for 22 years to storyboard, and it is not how my brain works. Like, if I could have Tony Stark's computer where he just like grabs and moves things around, I would be all over it. But for me personally, storyboarding doesn't work out that well, but I'm gonna give you guys a short list of applications that you might wanna try out in your writing. And some of those accommodate more free-form approaches to storyboarding, and that helps me. Oftentimes I'll start out like writing a character page and then I'll end up writing like the entire character, like the story plot on that character page instead, then I have to copy paste it in other places. So storyboarding doesn't work for my chaotic brain, but it's a very good process if it works for you.
One thing I've found that works for me is that when I have to write a scene, I will write down bullet points, what needs to be conveyed, both emotionally and for the purpose of driving the story forward. So I have about 3 or 4 bullet points. Then I'll write it, and then I'll imagine what would somebody who's real serious say in all these situations, what would the most outlandish comedian say in all these circumstances, and maybe try to find a fine balance between the two.
That's awesome. I love that. All right, any other questions, thoughts, feedback? All right, so again, here is my, oh, nope, I lied. So here's some useful software, then I'll get to my contact information. So just real quick, you guys have probably heard till you're blue in the face that Final Draft is the standard for screenwriting. Don't touch anything else. You'll never get published if you don't use Final Draft. That's not true. Final Draft is a fine application. It's also a prohibitively expensive application at times, and every time a new version comes out, you have to pay that same prohibitive cost for every new version. So for me personally, I use Fade-In, and it's used by also quite a few people that are in the industry now. Fade-In costs considerably less than Final Draft, but has all the same features. And I will tell you too, when you hear Final Draft touting things like their AI voice-to-speech, and that's worth giving them an extra $130, it literally just uses the voice-to-speech that your computer already has. You're paying for features your computer already has. So Fade-In is what I use when I write screenplays. You can get it on Mac OS, you can get it on Windows, you can get it on iPad, so you can seamlessly work wherever you're at. For novels, I use Scrivener, and Scrivener does have a screenwriting component to it. I personally don't think it's very good. It's best to have purpose-built tools. But Scrivener allows you to organize your stories however you want to. It's got character sections, scenario sections, scene sections. You actually create your storyboard within it, and it's like a virtual corkboard. Obsidian allows you to create a compendium for your narrative. Essentially, it lets you make a wiki page for your narrative. And what it will do then is you're making characters and you're making scenes and locations and you're putting them in separate folders, is it will automatically make a visualization on a map of how everything relates to everything else in your story. So it's a great way to help visualize your threads and to make sure that you've not forgotten relationships you meant to develop or scenes you meant to reference. Aeon Timeline, should you have need of planning out sequence of events and have that visually show how they relate and overlap. Aeon Timeline is good software for that as well. And Grammarly, right now there's a lot of confusion around is Grammarly AI or not. It has some beta AI components. Personally, I'm not a fan of AI generating content, but the core purpose of Grammarly is it's like spell check and grammar check on steroids. And so I encourage that feature, and it helps you catch your grammar, it helps you catch your spelling, but it's also no substitute for reading it out loud yourself. And when you read it out loud, you'll catch things that you won't catch when you read it silently to yourself. And last but not least, again, here is all my contact information if you didn't get it. The most important one to grab if you need to get a hold of me is just my email address, eugenetheauthor@gmail.com. And I want to be abundantly clear on this as we wrap. I don't know how many of you have gone to conferences, have gone to workshops, have gone to different events, and you've met people that are like, oh man, yeah, reach out to me, I'll work with you, I'll talk to you, we're gonna do big things, and then they ghost you and you never hear from them again. I give you my sincere word, on my honor, that I will never ghost you unless you're super creepy and standing outside my window in the middle of the night. I'm doing this in addition to being a content creator and my day job and my faith and family commitments, and so I may not always be able to get to you as quickly as I'd like to. If you feel like you reached out and I haven't gotten back to you in a timely manner, just reach out again. Hey, I know you're busy, but I was hoping we could follow up on this. Sincerely, I promise you, I will not ghost you.
So Eugene, I just emailed you like 5 minutes ago and I still don't have a response.
Dude, get out of my face. Who are you?